also a warm welcome once again to the conversation stage. A warm welcome to you who might not have been here before. And as you know, the headsets are part of actually hearing what we say on stage. To introduce our next theme, I just wanted to lift a quote by an ancient Greek physician, who I'm sure you all know, Hippocrates, who said, "Let food be thy medicine, and medicine be thy food." And when we think about this, it really shows how important nutrition and food is to our bodies, which we know. But what really is a good diet in today's, plethora of different diets? What is the optimal human diet? Well, luckily, we have someone who's an expert on this, Umahro Cadogan, who is going to tell us more about maybe the diets, extreme diets that are sort of in vogue and what they can give us or what they can actually extract from us. So please give it up for Umahro Cadogan, who is a functional medicine expert, author, host of the TV show Spise, Rask, and also known as Mastermind of Food.
Thank you. Right. Just for starters, I'm going to say that if you're really religiously aligned with a diet, you might get a bit offended. Because I'm just going to speak no holds barred, right? So I'm going to lambast the diets, but I'll also tell you what they can do. And then at the end, we'll actually look at what you should start with doing. So before you embark upon any sort of extreme diet, there's some very basic fundamentals that should be in place, right? So keep that in mind, right? These days with health, with nutrition, all sorts of things, you better start with the basics and fundamentals. And if you don't have those in place, don't bother with all the little finicky details or minute things. So we're going to look at some of the minute things, when they're right, when they're wrong, when it comes to diet and nutrition. But we will also look at what should be your fundamentals. And if they're not in place, don't bother with anything else. And as mentioned, I'm pretty nerdy when it comes to nutrition and health and lifestyle. And in fact, not only do I work with this, but I've literally cured myself. So at the age of 19, I developed multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis, inflammatory bowel disease, lost about 40 kilograms. So back then I was all the way down to about 58 kilograms, and I've always been in the high 90s or low hundreds, depending on time of year. Low hundreds after Christmas and New Year, after Easter, high 90s during other periods of the year. And this is all the way back in the mid-90s, by the way. I'm 47, at least chronologically. And I literally had to use diet and lifestyle and nutrition to cure myself. And so I've also used some of these more extreme diets on my own journey back to health, tested some of them. But if I were to become religious and say, well, because this particular diet worked for me, therefore that must be the only diet that works either for the same type of issues like I had with all these inflammatory autoimmune diseases, or in general, well, if I were to do that, I'd be a goddamn fool, right? So when it comes to all these people who become like religious zealots in terms of diet, you really should always be a bit skeptical, a bit wary, and say, yeah, but... And I fully appreciate people try all sorts of very extreme diets and they have massive success, right? Some people go vegan and their inflammatory bowel disease goes away. Some people go keto, carnivore, their rheumatoid arthritis goes away. I have full respect for that. Kudos for that. But that's not to say that's the only way, nor is it to say that other people who actually have the same health problem must do exactly what you do. So if you do that, then you put on blinders and become religious in a not very nice way. So what diets are we going to look at? We're going to look at all these diets that are in this very sort of animal and to some extent anti-plant or anti-carbohydrate diets, right? Keto, carnivore, LCHF, paleo, and I put that in quotes because when a lot of people speak of Paleolithic diets, that has very little to do with hunter-gatherers actually eat. I mean, one of the fallacies in the paleo diet is, well, just get lots of saturated fats because our forefathers got that. Have you ever looked at the fatty acid profile of game? Like if you're a Hadza, you're not eating anything alike to butter or bacon, although you're eating animals, because those animals are lean and mean, right? So we're going to have a look at all these very animal-based diets that are kind of, to some extent, anti-carbohydrate, sometimes even anti-plant, and see, well, what works, what doesn't. And we'll also look at the other end of the spectrum, because the other end of the extreme is like, if you eat anything that comes from an animal, you're dead before you finish chewing a mouthful, right? Like just think of it and you'll drop dead with multiple diseases. And that's not really the case either. And then we'll also have a look at some of these fasting diets, intermittent fasting, which really should be called time-restricted eating, because they promise things that the science simply doesn't support. That's not to say they can't be a tool for particular people in certain situations, but let's really get into the nitty-gritty and get an understanding of what's going on with these diets, what you should look out for, and also what things you should take with you or when you can use them. Now, in other words, we're going to look at the rate or the sort of split between bullshit or bingo. Because for some of these diets, for you, with your particular genetics, your health condition, the state of your body and your physiology, some of the more extreme diets might just be the right thing. But for another person, that might be the absolutely worst thing they can do. And really what you should keep in mind when it comes to all these extreme diets is this quote, and I really love saying this at US conferences, because then people get kind of, and they drop their matcha latte or their beetroot juice, whatever, right? Single factor thinking is simply the biggest source of fuck-ups in biology, medicine, and healthcare. So whenever people say it's just this one thing, it's this one nutrient that's good or bad, it's this one physiological function, run for the hills. I mean, if we were just to do a little history tour over the last 50, 60 years of nutrition, right? Back in the 80s and 90s, anything with saturated fat, animal fat, and cholesterol is bad. So as long as there's none of that, you're good. And that got us what? Lots of highly processed carbs, and then it got us lots of highly processed seed oils that also were hydrogenated with trans fats. Now, that killed people. Then the next thing is, well, actually, carbs are bad. So just if there are no carbs, everything's good. And insulin's the goddamn enemy. So stay away from carbs, but eat lots of protein. It's just one problem. Protein pushes insulin like hell, so that explanatory model just doesn't make sense from a biological point of view. And then the next thing became, well, you know, since saturated fat wasn't single-handedly the cause of disease, maybe we should proactively eat more of it. In fact, if you don't add butter to every single meal along with bacon and pork rind, then you're doing something wrong, because ancestrally that's what we ate. No. Go back, look at the Hadza, look at the Xhosa tribe, look at the Aborigines in the outback of Australia, all these hunter-gatherers. Yeah, they eat animals, but those animals are lean and mean. If you do the fatty acid profile on the fat from any of this game, it looks more like olive oil with a dash of flaxseed oil and a dash of fish oil in it, more than anything you see in modern animals, right? And then we came to the point, well, actually, if you eat any animal foods, you'll die. They're bad for you. So just as long as there's no animal in there, it's good, right? So, and you can be vegan for ethical reasons, cool. I don't have an issue with that. But from the point of health, that's saying, well, just eat nothing animal and you'll be perfectly fine. What a load of bollocks. And what we're getting now is all these plant-based foods that are super processed, right? We get all these animal food substitutes. And the argument is, well, since there's no animal in there, it's good. But what do we know? Speaking of nutritional history, the one thing that will thoroughly fuck you up the ass, pardon the language, but as I said, I speak frankly, in terms of health, are highly processed foods. So now we think that highly processed plant foods will be good for you just because there's nothing animal in there. Trust me, it's about the same quality as the same old shitty tre-stjernede salami you'll find. There might not be any animals in there, but it doesn't matter, it's the same thing, right? So single factor thinking, just get away from it. And I'll tell you why. This is a very simple diagram of what affects your health. Different systems in your body, different, organ systems, all these background things. So anyone who says whether it comes to nutrition or diet, or like say, well, it's just about insulin, or it's just about cortisol, it's just about your gut microbiota, really? And that's the simplified version here. That's just like helicopter view to get a grasp, right? And so, of course, if that's just the simple overview of the human body and what influences your health, notion that this particular diet, with just looking at this one mechanism, just looking at this type of ingredient, just looking at this sort of physiology, would be the right thing for everyone. Really? Nah. Now, if you truly believe that, I'd like to know what drugs you're on, because being blissfully unaware of reality can be nice once in a while. Right. So if we start with all these animal sort of, and to some extent, anti-plant diets, keto, carnivore, LCHF, right? Paleo, now there's real hunter-gatherer, and then there's wannabe, which is paleo, right? Well, what they claim is you don't need any plant foods. In fact, some of them say, well, plants contain all these evolutionary defensive compounds, they'll be bad for you. So if you eat plant foods, you'll get all sorts of diseases. You know, oxalic acid will kill you. The isothiocyanates in broccoli are really bad for you. They're going to fuck up your thyroid. Really? Nah, right? And then it's like, you don't need any carbohydrates. In fact, the way to avoid being obese is just don't eat carbohydrates, right? Really? Let's go and look at some of these ancestral people. If you look at some of the ancestral people that live in the Pacific, that are hunter-gatherers, but they're fish, they eat shitloads of tubers. In fact, they get 70% of their calories from carbs, but from like yams, taro root, sweet potato-like things, and some tropical fruit. Oh yeah, they eat fruit as well. Oh no, pineapple, they're gonna die from fructose. Nah, they're super lean and healthy, right? And then there's, oh, you don't need fiber. Like fiber is not really necessary, so really? And then saturated fat is always good, the more the better. Really? Well, I can tell you in my clinic, I have people who went all in carnivore who within 2-3 years got fully clogged arteries, got xanthomas, so they literally started getting fat and cholesterol deposits on their eyes. But it's okay. My total cholesterol is 8, my LDL is 5, but it's not a problem because I'm no carbon, no plant. Yeah, if we scan your carotid, I can tell you a different story. If we look at your heart, yeah, no, you might only have about 50% of normal blood flow. So that notion is wrong. And then, of course, unsaturated fat and seed oils are just bad for you. If you eat seed oils, you'll drop dead this moment. Don't eat olive oils, don't eat pumpkin seeds because they're bad for you. Nah, it's true in population studies if you go to the US. People who have a really high intake of seed oils do really badly. That's not because of the seed oils, that's because they're just a surrogate marker for a massive intake of highly processed junk food. Because what do you put in the deep fryer where you throw in your chicken wings, your French fries, your potato chips and so forth, your chicken nuggets, your fish fingers? Yeah, they go in seed oils. So it's not seed oils that are the problem, but true in population studies, the people who get the top 20% intake of seed oils are doing badly, but it's just because they're a marker of overeating things that are deep fried and over fried and have been industrially processed. But that's not the, oh, olive oil, or like, oh, there's omega-6 in sesame oil, you will now die if you eat sesame oil. Really go back and look at the studies. It's the opposite. Sesame oil is anti-inflammatory, right? So yeah, overeating highly processed deep fried foods that contain a lot of seed oils will screw you. But that's not to sort of make the reverse argument, don't eat seed oils because they'll kill you. The olive oil is dangerous because it's a seed oil. Nah, wrong. And then of course the other thing is that fructose is dangerous per se. If you eat 2 grapes or half banana, you're gonna drop dead with fatty liver, type 2 diabetes, cancer. No. Again, true population studies. The people who are at the top 20% intake of fructose do really badly in terms of diseases of civilization. Why? Well, all that added sugar we get and throw into our food, whether it's fizzy drinks, ice cream, breakfast cereals, that happens to be 50% fructose. So when you get population studies where people have a high intake of fructose, that's not a marker of them eating bananas, pears, and plums, and cherries, and pineapple, and pears. No, that's a marker of excess consumption of highly refined sugar as part of a highly refined diet made of super processed foods. But you cannot then say, well, if you eat a banana, then you're going to get fatty liver, that sort of thing. It's just wrong. Like, basically, if you understand physiology, biochemistry, wrong, wrong, wrong. And then, of course, also the animal crowd is, well, calories don't matter. If you're just keto, or if you're not eating any carbs, you can have any amount of calories. Wrong. True, there are people who lose weight on a keto diet. Well, if that, for that particular person happens to be satiating to the point they eat less than before, of course they're going to lose weight, even if they don't count calories, right? And then we have this plant protein is bad. In fact, if you eat plant protein, your muscles will implode and just fly away into a black hole, disappear forever. Nah, it's true if you get to the very peak of bodybuilding or sports, you probably need more plant protein to maintain lean mass, repair your muscles, tendons, and ligaments if you're doing top CrossFit, Olympic weightlifting, powerlifting, strongman, strong woman competitions, that sort of thing, you know, American football. Perfectly fine, but plant protein is not bad. In fact, if you look at the population studies, plant protein, not when it comes from these super processed modern foods, but when it comes from real food, associated with more health. And then this insulin's really evil. Except like people who say that and then say lots of protein, they need to go back to biochemistry and biology school because protein is about as insulinogenic as carbs are on a gram or calorie basis. So if you eat a lot of protein, that's going to push insulin levels up as well. So it cannot be that insulin's the devil or the enemy. It's true if you add more protein, if you have problems regulating blood glucose, your blood glucose gets better. Why? Because that extra protein pushes more insulin to then enhance your metabolism of carbohydrates. But the notion that insulin is bad, protein won't push insulin, totally wrong. And then, of course, ketosis is the way, like the only way. We were born in ketosis. We can only work in ketosis. We'll get to when ketogenic diets work, but also the notion, if you're in ketosis, then you burn fat, so calories don't matter. Wrong. It's true if you're in ketosis, a higher proportion of the energy you burn will be fat because that's the only available energy source. But that's not really what matters if you look at weight management. It's total calorie intake and total calorie utilization, right? I mean, it's like I could do a study saying that I will only use Russian rubles. And so if I only have Russian rubles, then when I spend money, I'll spend more rubles. Yeah, because there are only rubles around. That's not to say, well, then rubles will only be the only way to spend money or make money for where my earnings were only coming in rubles. If I had a distribution of incomes of different currencies, well, that would just be distributed. And one of the things we actually see if we look at physiological testings, the people who go all in keto, if we look at their total energy turnover, total energy utilization, when we push them, it's lower than athletes who are in a mix of carbohydrates and fats. So I've looked at that. In fact, I've even seen physiological studies done here in Denmark by Mads Tersbøl on people who are in ketosis, and they had poorer fat utilization than athletes who actually ate carbs, because those athletes were in better shape because they could train more and harder, right? So there are these fallacies that simply aren't true. Now, there are potential uses. We know for a ketogenic diet, we can actually enhance chemotherapy. So if you either fast or go keto, or really low carb, about 1 day before you get on chemo, 1.5 days and 1 day after, that will actually enhance the functioning of the chemo. The chemo will hit the cancer cells harder. So that would be a potential utilization. Do that cyclically. And for some cancers in the central nervous system, being keto or really low carb works because your brain preferably burns glucose. So if you have a cancer that originates from some sort of neurological tissue, and they only really can use glucose, and you take it away, you will starve the cancer. But cancers in other tissues can switch around. They can switch to protein, fats, and other energy sources. In certain psychiatric neurological disorders, keto actually works, but only in those patients where you explicitly see they have crap glucose utilization. Some of that research is being done here in Denmark. So a certain proportion of people who have diagnosis of OCD, schizophrenia, depression, bipolar, if you look at their whole body, they will be pre-type 2 diabetic or type 2 diabetic, or if you do imaging studies in their brain, you can see even if they have normal blood sugar regulation utilization peripherally, centrally it's not very good. And if you then put those people on a ketogenic diet, of course it will work, because if your brain can't use its primary fuel source, and then you switch it to ketones, that would improve matters, right? So that's a potential use. And we can also see some cases of neurological damage, so people who are post, say, stroke, post-encephalitis, meningitis, if they had a really severe concussion, some sort of other brain trauma. In some instances where we see signs of poor glucose utilization, switching them to keto actually helps their brain repair and recover. And then in some cases of autoimmune diseases, it might work because you're going to starve out microbes that will trigger cross reactions. So if you look at rheumatoid arthritis, ledegigt, a subset of rheumatoid arthritis patients react to the group of gut bacteria called Prevotella. So Prevotella are usually used as a marker of a high intake of plant foods. Usually lots of Prevotella, yeah, you're getting your vegetables, berries, and fruits, and so forth. But in a subset of people with rheumatoid arthritis, their immune system, due to genetics, looks at Prevotella and says, oh, I'm going to burn out your knees or your hips. And so if you then take away all plant foods and remove the Prevotella, which would normally be a good gut microbe to have, that will work, but it's only for that subgroup. So I'm quite sure if we were to take Mihalia Peterson, Jordan Peterson's daughter, who's, pretty pro carnivore keto because that helped her with her rheumatoid arthritis. I haven't seen her genetics, but I'd be damn sure that she's one of the people who has the genes that will actually cause this cross reaction between Prevotella and your own joints, right? So that would work. Sometimes also in severe type 2 diabetes, you could start that, just to get blood sugars down really quickly and then over time change body composition, increase exercise, physical capacity, and those where it suppresses appetite and therefore leads to a calorie deficit. So it has certain uses when we look at all these higher animal foods, less plants, less carbohydrates, but you can see these are very specific conditions where you need to go that far. And sure, there are all sorts of good things in animal foods. Also, people say, don't eat anything animal because you'll die. Nah, you get creatine, check. You get iron, check. You get zinc, copper, L-carnitine, B12, B2, protein, choline, lecithin, omega-3 fats, CLA, if you get dairy food, not like cheese, yogurt, kefir, that thing, from animals that actually roam free. You get Q10 and vitamin K2 and like liver, dark meat from fowl, so chicken wings, chicken thighs, not chicken breast, and also in properly aged cheese. So there are all sorts of really cool things in animal foods, and what I'm seeing in the clinic are people who have become afraid of animal foods turn up with deficiencies of all those things. We could also add vitamin D, although that's like fish only, right? But so again, so I'm not saying that animal foods are bad, I'm just saying, and there are really things in there we need in appropriate amounts, but that's not to say that can cover all your nutrient needs. So if you're going to do something like that, I suggest you should still have your vegetables, berries, and fruits. And if you're doing an LCHF, look at this. This is not the butter, 48% crème fraîche, cheddar, pork rind, pork belly, pork loin, LCHF. That's the salmon, avocado, walnut, almond, LCHF. And yeah, we added some red meat in there as well, and even a T-bone that's more fatty, but that should be the thing. That same thing, if you really need to go keto for long-term for health, unless you want to really screw your cardiovascular system, you really should do a keto that's way more based on olive oil, avocados, sesame seeds, tahini, that sort of thing, because then you can get all the benefits when they're necessary without having this dyslipidemia that, regardless of what some people say, if you have really high cholesterol levels, especially in conjunction with other things that are bad for your arteries, like high blood pressure, that sort of thing, they are an issue. If you look at proper studies, lifetime exposure to LDL does correlate with calcification. Not as the only thing, there are many other things as well, but that's definitely part of the picture. Plants, they're mandatory, it's not up for discussion. If you look at any population study, if you're not eating 600 grams of vegetables, berries, and fruits per day, you are increasing your risk of death from diseases of civilization. And the data show that about every 100 grams you're short of 600 per day, not on a single day or week, but over a lifetime or decades, well, hello, you now increased your risk of death from diseases of civilization by 10%. So if you only eat 400 grams of vegetables, berries, and fruits per day, well, congratulations, you just increased your risk of dying early from cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, cancer, by 20%. You also increased your risk of osteoporosis, chronic obstructive lung disease, whether you smoke or not, dementia, depression, osteoarthritis as you grow older. So this notion that plant foods are bad for you, they're not really important, just avoid carbohydrates. When you look at population level, what a load of bollocks. Right? Then if we go in the other direction, say, oh, but all the animal foods are bad, so just only eat plants because, well, we just looked, there are actually pretty important nutrients in fish, in meat, in eggs, and so forth. The other claim is, well, any animal food is bad for you because you'll die. Well, you should go and have a look at the Hadza. Most of you probably know Chris MacDonald, right? He's in pretty good shape. When he did his book, not up for discussion, eller ikke til diskussion in Danish, he went and lived with the Hadza. And the senior Hadza members took him hunting. So like the old guys, 60, 70 years old. And about 5 minutes into the hunt, they were like, you know what? I think you're going to go back home because, oh man, your breath is really heavy and like you're not really that agile. So you're just going to scare away the baboons and the animals we're going to catch. And so they're a hunter-gatherer tribe. So if animal foods were that bad, how come the 50, 60, 70-year-old Hadza were in better shape than Chris MacDonald, right? So that notion is just wrong. Now, true, when you have a high intake of these super processed animal foods, that's what gets you in trouble. It's not animal foods per se, it's super processed animal foods. They will kill you, and that's what you see in population studies. Then the other thing is protein's not that important. If you eat a lot of protein, like you're going to get cardiovascular disease, your kidneys will explode, that sort of thing. Bullshit. And in fact, we're seeing plenty of people not getting enough protein. The older you are, the more protein you need. And the ideal amount is probably about 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram of body weight per day. That's at healthy body weight. So if you weigh 200 kilograms, you should be 100 kilograms. You're not going to do 320 grams of protein. That would be 160 grams of protein. A lot of people actually aren't meeting that. And on top of that, then they eat shitty protein sources. And true, that will get them in trouble. But that's not to say protein's an issue. And also what we see quite clearly is that for kidneys, yeah, protein's not damaging to your kidneys, but if you have a kidney problem, you need to reduce protein, but you cannot, and you can't like turn around the logic. That's like saying, oh, you ruptured your Achilles tendon, so you shouldn't do plyometrics. True, but if you have an intact Achilles tendon, you should do plyometrics if you want it to be stronger. You cannot switch around the logic. It just doesn't make sense. And then of course, any saturated fat is bad. Animal fats are always bad. That's not the case either. But you shouldn't go either extreme. And then it's like, dairy products are bad for you per se. Nope. There are studies in the US where the people who are in the top 20 intake of dairy products are in trouble. Why? Because that's simply a marker of a massive intake of deep pan pizza, thin crust pizza, burgers, nachos under a load of what's called cheddar, right? Burgers with low quality meat and all sorts of crap, and French fries on the side with cheddar. Yogurt that happens to be more sugar than yogurt, and then about homeopathic doses of strawberries or bananas. Yeah, sure, that correlates with problems, but that's not dairy products per se. If dairy products were so bad per se, how come the population with the lowest risk of breast cancer among females happens to be herders in outer Mongolia? And if you're a herder, what do you eat a damn lot of? Dairy products. They only have half the rate of breast cancer compared with women in Okinawa, women in Thailand, in rural China, and in some of these little traditional Mediterranean villages in Greece and so forth, right? And then, oh, iron's bad for you. Nope, too much is, but that's another story. And carbs can never be excessive, so like just eat loads of starch. If you're type 2 diabetic and you go fully vegan on lots of oatmeal, potatoes, that sort of thing, I'm not really sure that's a super good idea, right? And then carnitine, also the carnitine will turn into TMAO, which will kill you. Really no population statistics show that either. Or creatine, also don't take it because like you're going to get big muscles and your kidneys will rupture. Nope. But if you do want to be a bit weaker and cognitively a bit dumber, please stay away from creatine. That's what you'll get. Your choice. I'd prefer not to do that. So what can they do? If you have really, really high lipidemia and severe atherosclerosis, doing a period without animal fats could actually be good for you. In certain autoimmune diseases where you have an issue of a lack of beneficial gut bacteria, eating a very plant-based diet could feed those and thus get good bacteria back in the mix that will tell your immune system to calm down. So again, you can see even with rheumatoid arthritis, either one can work depending on your genetics and the makeup of your gut microbiota, right? And some people, it really suppresses appetite, so they like really feel satiated, and therefore if they need to lose body fat, it will work. And in some instances of cancer, going vegan can work as well. So there are potential uses, but that's different from it must be. And there are all these awesome things in plant foods that you must get. Vitamin C, vitamin K1, folate, magnesium, calcium, manganese, fiber, phytosterols, vitamin E, true form, all these phytochemicals, all these plant compounds that are super healthy. Yeah, they're defensive compounds in the plants, but actually they speak to your body and upregulate all sorts of protective mechanisms like detoxification, antioxidant defense systems, downregulation of excess inflammation. So if you stay away from plants, you're going to lose out on all that stuff. And we know the statistics. Every 100 grams lower than 600 plus 10% death before your time is really up, right? And then, of course, we have the miracle of fasting. Now, the aim is that timing is more important than what you eat. That's bollocks, right? It is. The other aim is that pauses matter more than your calories in and out or your macros. Also not true. And if you fast for 18 hours, you'll get massive autophagy. So all your old cells will be replenished with new ones and all your senescent cells will die. Not really true either. And you should get this massive stem cell production if you don't eat for 18 hours. And you get massive upregulation of mitochondria. No, if you want mitochondria, goddamn exercise and move every day. Do lots of it. That's what's going to get your mitochondria like hell. And then it should improve sleep. For some people, yes. But for other people, if they actually go for too long without food, that's going to give them really poor sleep. So it could work, but it's not always the case. And I've seen people who had sleep disruption because they stopped actually eating over more of the day and had too long a period without food. Should improve your gut microbiota. Yeah, sure. If you normally eat loads of shit and now you only have 8 hours to eat and you choose vegetables, berries, fruits, healthy fats, your gut microbiota will improve, not because of the pause, but because you stopped literally shoving crap down your gullet and started eating real food, right? And then you should get this massive increase in lean mass because of human growth hormone. There's just one thing, growth hormone doesn't stimulate muscle growth. That's steroids that will do that. So again, okay, get back, learn your basic biology. And true, some people lose fat, so their relative muscle mass increases, but their real muscle mass won't increase a damn gram. That's strength training, enough protein and creatine with sleep that will do it. Now, it is a framework for some people to stop overeating. For some people, this 8 hours eating window, 16 hours no eating can be a way to stop eating shit. And you become way more aware of what you eat when you're eating. And that's really good. So if that works for you, kudos. But it's not the pause that worked. It's the fact you created an environment in which you cannot overeat and where you became way more aware of what you're eating, right? And that's also the way for some people to control excess calorie intake. So that's pretty cool. For some people, it's an easier way to control hunger during weight loss. So some people say it's easier for me to like be hungry for a while and then have 8 hours where I feel fully satiated whilst they lose weight, rather than having more food but kind of being semi-hungry all the time. So if that works for you, kudos, fantastic, lovely. And then for some people it improves sleep. So some people sleep better if there's a long time from when they finish eating until they sleep. And for some people it can lower GI symptoms. If you constantly have bloating, like meteorism and like the volcano bubbling, and you have less time with food passing through, of course you'll feel better. But you should still go back and fix your problem, right? Now, if you really want some of these effects, you should go longer. 24 hours can actually lower pro-inflammatory cytokines. So 24 hours could actually be used for controlling inflammation. If you do 3 to 5 day fasts, then some of these things start happening, like autophagy, reprogramming your immune system, more stem cells, but they do not happen at 18 hours. 18 hours is just like, you get a little taste. It's kind of like the strip cup principle. Ah, there's nothing, ah, there was nothing, ah, there was nothing, ah, there was nothing. You thought you saw a bit, that's all. So if you really want these effects of not eating, yeah, just go for 3 to 5 days. That's where the magic happens. So where should you go? Just start with the fundamentals. Think about food as information. So make sure most of the food you eat happens to be this message and not up yours, because your body will respond in kind. And the same goes for lifestyle. Lifestyle is information, exercise is information, sleep is information, de-stressing is information that will tell your body to behave and make it positive. So that's really the distribution you should start with, the T-plate model. At least half vegetables, berries, and fruits, about a quarter healthy protein with healthy fat, and a quarter of healthy starches. Unless you have a blood sugar issue, then you might want to decrease the carbs. Otherwise, no need for that. And if you have a blood sugar issue, yeah, then you could decrease the carbs a bit, or you could even decrease them more. Plant foods, still not out of the game. They are mandatory. No, they're not mandatory. They're not optional. You must have them. And some people can go vegan, but you need to make sure you get all those nutrients that you're not getting through supplementation and really clever food combining. And then just, yeah, these things are not up for discussion. You know, that's really what will give you longevity. And then the other things you can tweak depending on your biochemistry, your physiology, your genetics, and your needs. But if you start at any of the other extremes and you don't have this in place, do this first. If your body still ain't working, then you need to start going down rabbit holes, but not until you've done that. And then, yeah, exercise, not up for discussion either. So back to the point, single factor thinking, source of the biggest fuck-ups in biology, medicine, and healthcare. And you really should start by eating real foods in a distribution we've seen through population studies work across generations and populations and decades and millennia. That should be your blueprint. And then you can tweak it depending on whether you have very particular needs because of disease or health problems. So thank you for your time and attention, and any provocation was just meant as motivational.